The laugh came at 11:17 in the morning, corner of 125th and Lenox. Loud enough that people across the street turned their heads. A man in a brown jacket stood outside Murphy's grocery, laughing so hard he had to wipe tears from his eyes. In front of him stood an older black woman holding a paper bag of groceries. She was maybe 5'2", thin, grey hair pulled back, wore a simple blue dress and shoes that had been resoled twice. She looked down at the ground, didn't respond, didn't fight back, just stood there absorbing whatever the man in the brown jacket was saying. He kept talking, louder now, making sure everyone on the block could hear. His finger jabbed toward her face. She took a step back. He stepped forward, kept going. A young kid sweeping the sidewalk stopped moving. The broom hung in his hands. His eyes went wide. Not because of the yelling. Harlem in 1936 had plenty of that. But because he recognized the woman. He'd seen her 3 days ago getting out of a black Cadillac on Edgecombe Avenue, seen who was driving. The kid's mouth went dry. He wanted to say something, wanted to warn the man in the brown jacket. But the words wouldn't come. The man wouldn't have listened anyway. He was too busy laughing. The woman finally walked away, slow, dignified, head up, despite everything. The man in the brown jacket yelled one more thing at her back. Something about knowing her place. Something about coming back here and he'd do worse than talk. Then he laughed again, slapped his thigh, turned to his 2 friends standing nearby and said something that made them laugh too. Across the street, in a barber shop with the door propped open, 3 men stopped their conversation mid-sentence. The barber's scissors froze in the air. One of the customers whispered, "Jesus Christ." Another one just shook his head. The barber, an old-timer named Clayton who'd been cutting hair in Harlem since 1922, put down his tools and walked to the window. Watched the woman in the blue dress turn the corner and disappear. Watched the man in the brown jacket light a cigarette, still grinning. Clayton had seen a lot in 16 years, seen men get shot over dice games, seen women cut their husbands with kitchen knives, seen the police beat people half to death for sport. But he'd never seen anything as stupid as what just happened on that corner. He knew who that woman was, knew who her son was, and he knew that man in the brown jacket had maybe 6 hours left before his life changed forever. But the man in the brown jacket didn't know any of that. His name was Raymond Price. He was 34 years old, worked as muscle for a small-time operator named Eddie Marks, who ran a protection racket in Lower Harlem. Raymond wasn't smart, wasn't connected, wasn't even particularly good at his job, but he was big, 6'1", 220 pounds, and he'd learned that size plus volume usually got him what he wanted. He'd been collecting from Murphy's grocery for 3 months, $50 a week. Eddie's cut for making sure nobody robbed the place, making sure the windows didn't get broken. Standard protection hustle. Murphy paid on time, never complained. But this morning there was a problem. Raymond showed up and Murphy said he couldn't pay, said business was slow, said he needed another week. Raymond didn't like that answer. He'd raised his voice, started breaking things, knocked over a display of canned goods, slammed his fist on the counter. Murphy, a 60-year-old Jewish immigrant who'd survived worse than Raymond Price, stayed calm. Said he'd pay double next week, said he just needed time. Raymond was winding up to break something more expensive when the woman walked in. She'd been shopping there for 3 days, staying in the neighborhood visiting family. Murphy knew her son, but Raymond had never seen her before. Just saw an old black woman who walked in at the wrong time. He'd turned his anger on her, told her to get out, called her names that made Murphy's stomach turn. The woman didn't respond, just stood there. That silence made Raymond angrier. He'd gotten in her face, made threats, told her he'd come back and deal with her if she didn't move. Still nothing. Just those quiet eyes looking past him like he wasn't worth her attention. That's when he'd laughed. Something about the situation struck him as funny. This old woman thinking she could ignore him, thinking silence was a shield. He'd laughed and made one final threat, loud enough for everyone to hear. Then she'd walked out. And Raymond felt like he'd won something. Put her in her place. Showed everyone in the store who had power. Murphy didn't say anything. Just stood behind his counter looking pale. Raymond had collected his $50 from the register, told Murphy he'd be back next week, Same time, same amount. Then he'd walked outside where his friends were waiting and told them what happened. They all laughed. Just another Tuesday in Harlem, just another nobody getting put in their place. What Raymond didn't know was that the woman's name was Margaret Moultrie Johnson. What he didn't know was that she'd taken the train from Charleston, South Carolina 4 days ago to visit her son. What he didn't know was that her son owned half of Lenox Avenue. What he didn't know was that her son had killed 3 of Dutch Schultz's men in the past year. What he didn't know was that the young kid who'd been sweeping the sidewalk was already running full speed toward Edgecombe Avenue to deliver a message. And what Raymond definitely didn't know was that in exactly 6 hours and 43 minutes, he would be sitting in a basement with a straight razor at his throat, begging for his life, finally understanding that some people in Harlem had sons who remembered everything. But first you need to understand who Margaret Moultrie was. Charleston, South Carolina, 1883. That's when she was born into a world that didn't want her to exist. Her parents had been enslaved 18 years before she arrived, still carried the scars, still remembered the auction blocks and the whips and the separation of families sold like cattle. They'd survived, built a life from nothing, raised Margaret to be quiet, to be small, to survive in a place that would kill her for breathing wrong. She learned those lessons well, married William Johnson in 1902, had 7 children, watched them grow up in a South that barely considered them human. She taught them the rules: keep your head down, say yes sir and no ma'am, never look white folks directly in the eye, cross the street when they walk toward you, your pride is worth nothing if you're dead. 6 of her children learned. Her youngest didn't. Ellsworth had fire in him from birth. Even as a little boy he'd talk back, he'd ask why. He'd look people in the eye and refuse to blink first. Margaret loved that about him, and it terrified her, because she knew what happened to black boys with fire in Charleston. She'd seen them hanging from trees, seen them beaten to death behind barns, seen them disappear into swamps and rivers, never to return. When Ellsworth was 10, his older brother Willie got accused of murdering a white man. The accusation didn't need proof, didn't need witnesses, just needed to be said out loud. Margaret had hours to save Willie's life. She and William mortgaged their house, sold their furniture, got Willie on a northbound train before the sun came up. He survived. They lost everything, but they saved their son. 9 years later, she made a harder choice. Ellsworth was 14 and getting worse. Talking back to white shopkeepers, walking with his shoulders back and his chin up, looking at white women without lowering his gaze. Margaret could see the rope forming, could see the mob gathering. It was only a matter of time, so she sent him away. Put him on a train to Harlem to live with his sister Mabel. It broke her heart. But broken hearts heal. Dead sons don't come back. Ellsworth didn't understand, thought she was abandoning him, hated her for it, wrote her angry letters for the first year. Then the letters stopped. Then nothing for 3 years. Margaret thought she'd lost him, thought maybe Harlem had swallowed him whole. Then, in 1925, an envelope showed up. No return address. Just $100 cash inside. The next month, another envelope. $100 every month after that. Same thing, she never asked where the money came from, never questioned it, just knew her son was alive somewhere. That was enough. 1936. She got a letter. First actual letter in 17 years, her son's handwriting. 2 sentences. Mama, come visit. I want you to see what I built. She'd taken the train north with her heart hammering in her chest. Didn't know what to expect. The boy she'd sent away was 30 years old now. A stranger. When she stepped off at Penn Station, she almost didn't recognize him. Tall, filled out, wearing a suit that cost more money than William made in a year. Diamond ring catching the light. But when he smiled at her, she saw her baby. He'd hugged her so tight she couldn't breathe. Called her Mama. Took her bags. Drove her through Harlem in a black Cadillac, pointing out buildings and corners and telling her stories about every block. He'd set her up in his apartment. Nice place, Edgecombe Avenue, the best part of Harlem. Told her to rest. Told her he'd take her out later. Show her his world. But Margaret couldn't rest. She'd gone out walking. Wanted to see this place that had swallowed her son and turned him into whatever he'd become. She'd walked for hours, past the Apollo Theater, past the jazz clubs, past the policy banks where men in good suits stood guard. Nobody bothered her. She was just another old woman in a blue dress buying groceries and seeing the sights. She didn't notice the respect her son commanded, didn't see the way people moved when they recognized who she was. Just saw her boy's neighborhood, the place he called home. That morning she'd walked into Murphy's grocery, just needed eggs and flour. Wanted to make Ellsworth his favorite biscuits like she used to when he was small. Murphy had recognized her immediately. Seen her getting out of Bumpy Johnson's car 2 days before. He'd greeted her warmly, asked if she needed anything special. She was picking out eggs when Raymond Price walked in yelling. The whole thing happened fast. His anger, his threats, his finger in her face. Margaret had survived 53 years by knowing when to fight and when to be silent. This was a silence moment. She'd absorbed it, walked away with her dignity intact, didn't tell Raymond who she was, didn't threaten him, didn't need to, because she knew her son, knew what he'd become, and she knew this would reach him before she even got back to the apartment. She was right. The kid with the broom reached Bumpy's building by 11:32, ran up 5 flights of stairs, pounded on the door. Bumpy answered in an undershirt and slacks. The kid was breathless. Mr. Johnson, your mama, some guy, Murphy's store. He threatened her. He was laughing at her. Bumpy's face didn't change. Didn't show rage, didn't show anything. He just stood there absorbing the information like water filling a bucket. Then he asked one question. What did he look like? The kid described Raymond. Brown jacket, tall, white, 2 friends with him. Bumpy nodded, handed the kid $10, told him to forget he was ever here. The kid took the money and vanished. Bumpy stood in his doorway for exactly 30 seconds, completely still. Then he got dressed. He put on a fresh white shirt, black slacks, black vest, his good shoes, slicked his hair back, slid his straight razor into his vest pocket where he could reach it in half a second. Then he made 3 phone calls. The first was to a man named Raymond, who ran with Bumpy's crew. Not the same Raymond. This Raymond was loyal, smart, vicious when he needed to be. Bumpy told him to find out everything about a white guy in a brown jacket collecting for Eddie Marks. Where he lives, where he drinks, who he loves. Everything. Call me back in 2 hours. The second call was to Eddie Marks himself. Bumpy and Eddie weren't friends, but they weren't enemies. They operated in different circles. Eddie answered on the 3rd ring. Bumpy's voice was calm, friendly even. Eddie, this is Bumpy Johnson. I need to know about one of your collectors. White guy, brown jacket, works Murphy's store. Eddie hesitated. That's Raymond Price. Why? Bumpy said I need his address. There was silence on the other end. Then Eddie said, Bumpy, if this is about business, we can work it out. Bumpy said, it's not about business, Eddie, it's about my mother. Another silence. Then Eddie gave him the address. 47. West 128th Street, apartment 3B. The 3rd call was to his crew. 4 men he trusted with his life, men who'd been with him through the Schultz War, men who knew how to move quietly and hit hard. He told them where to be and when to be there. Didn't explain why. Didn't need to. Then he went to see his mother. She was back at his apartment making biscuits like nothing had happened, flour on her hands, humming something from church. Bumpy stood in the doorway watching her. She looked up and smiled. Baby, these'll be ready in 20 minutes. You hungry? He walked over and kissed her forehead. Mama, did something happen at Murphy's today? She stopped smiling. Her hands went still. It was nothing, baby. Just some man running his mouth. Bumpy's voice stayed soft. What did he say to you? Margaret looked at her son, really looked at him, saw the set of his jaw, the stillness in his eyes that meant violence was coming. She'd seen that look before, on the men who came for Willie, on the overseers her parents had described from slavery days, on every white man who'd ever threatened her family. But now it was on her son's face, and it scared her worse than anything. She put her flour-covered hands on his chest. Ellsworth Raymond Johnson, don't you do something stupid over words. Words can't hurt me. I've survived worse. You know I have. Bumpy covered her hands with his. Mama, in Charleston you had to take it, had to let them talk to you any way they wanted. But this is Harlem. This is my home. And in my home, nobody disrespects my mother. Nobody. She could see there was no point arguing. Her baby boy had become someone she didn't fully understand, someone who had power and pride and wouldn't bend. She just nodded, said be careful, said come back to me. Bumpy promised he would. Then he left. By 5 p.m. Bumpy had everything he needed. Raymond Price lived in a boarding house on 128th. Single room. No family in New York. Parents dead. Sister in Boston. He drank at a place called Hannigan's on Amsterdam, played cards on Thursday nights, owed money to 3 different bookies, had a girlfriend named Susan who worked at a hat shop on 123rd. Bumpy memorized it all. Then he waited. He knew Raymond's pattern. Eddie Marks had collectors check in at 6 p.m. every Tuesday, hand over the week's take, get their cut. Raymond would be at Eddie's office by 6. Bumpy would be waiting, but Bumpy didn't wait at Eddie's office. That would start a war. He waited at Hannigan's bar, walked in at 6:30 with 2 of his men. The bartender, an Irish guy named Patrick, recognized Bumpy immediately. "Mr. Johnson, what can I get you?" Bumpy ordered a whiskey, sat at the end of the bar, waited. Raymond walked in at 6:47, 3 whiskeys deep into celebrating a good collection day, walked right past Bumpy without recognizing him, ordered a beer, started talking loud to the bartender about his day, about putting some old woman in her place. Patrick's eyes went to Bumpy, then back to Raymond. He poured the beer with shaking hands. Bumpy let Raymond finish half the beer. Then he stood up, walked over, sat on the stool next to him. "Raymond, right." Raymond turned, looked at this well-dressed black man sitting next to him. "Yeah, who's asking?" Bumpy smiled. "I hear you had an interesting morning." Raymond's face scrunched up, confused. "Do I know you?" Bumpy said, "You don't. But you met my mother today. Outside Murphy's grocery, you laughed at her, threatened her. Made sure everyone on the block could hear you disrespect her." The bar went silent. Patrick backed away from the counter. Raymond's beer stopped halfway to his mouth. His brain was working, but not fast enough. "Your mother." Bumpy's smile never wavered. "Margaret Moultrie Johnson. Sweet woman, 5'2", blue dress. You told her you'd come back and deal with her if she didn't know her place." Raymond's face went white. The beer slipped from his hand, shattered on the floor. He stood up fast, chair scraping back. Bumpy stood too, didn't touch him, didn't need to. The 2 men Bumpy brought moved to block the door. Raymond looked around, looked at Bumpy. His mouth opened, but nothing came out. Bumpy said, "We're going to take a walk, Raymond. You and me. We're going to have a conversation about respect, about mothers, about knowing who you're talking to before you open your mouth." Raymond tried to run, made it 3 steps before Bumpy's men caught him, held him firm. Bumpy walked over, looked him in the eyes, said, "You had 6 hours, Raymond. 6 hours where you could have apologized, could have left town, could have done anything except laugh about what you did. But you didn't. You came here, drank beer, bragged about it. So now we're going to finish this conversation properly." They took him to a basement on 128th Street. Not his building, different one. A place Bumpy used for situations that required privacy. Raymond was crying now, making promises. He'd apologize. He'd leave New York. He'd never come back. Bumpy just listened, let him talk. Then he pulled out his straight razor, opened it slow. The blade caught the light from the single bare bulb hanging from a wire. Raymond's voice went higher, begging. "Please. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know who she was." Bumpy tilted his head. "So if she wasn't my mother, it would have been okay." Raymond shook his head frantically. "No. No, I just mean." Bumpy cut him off. "You mean you only respect women if they have powerful sons? Otherwise they're fair game. Otherwise you can threaten them, laugh at them, make them feel small." Raymond tried to speak. Bumpy continued. "My mother survived slavery's children, survived Jim Crow, survived Charleston, South Carolina, where men like you killed people who looked like her for sport. She survived all of that with her dignity intact. And then she came to my city, to the one place I've built where black people don't have to bow their heads, where my mother can walk down the street and feel safe. And you took that from her. For what? To feel big, To show off for your friends. Bumpy stepped closer. The razor moved to Raymond's throat. Not cutting, just resting there, cold steel against hot skin. You laughed, Raymond. That's what kills me. You didn't just threaten her. You laughed. Like it was funny. Like disrespecting a woman who's forgotten more about survival than you'll ever know was entertainment. Raymond was shaking so hard his teeth chattered. Bumpy's voice dropped to almost a whisper. I'm going to give you a choice, Raymond. Option 1, I kill you right now. Quick, clean, you're gone before you hit the ground. Option 2, I let you live, but you're going to carry a reminder. Every time you look in a mirror, every time you shave, every time someone sees your face, you'll remember this moment. You'll remember my mother. And you'll remember that in Harlem there are consequences for disrespecting black women. Raymond gasped out option 2. Option 2, please. Bumpy nodded. Smart choice. Then the razor moved, fast, precise, drew a line from Raymond's ear to his chin. Not deep enough to kill, just deep enough to scar, deep enough to mark him permanently. Raymond screamed. Bumpy's men held him steady. Bumpy wiped the blade clean on Raymond's brown jacket. Said, when people ask you about that scar, you tell them the truth. Tell them you disrespected Bumpy Johnson's mother. Tell them you laughed. Tell them you learned a lesson about respect the hard way. Now get out of my city. If I see you in Harlem again, I won't give you choices. Raymond stumbled toward the stairs, blood pouring down his neck onto his shirt. He ran, disappeared into the night. Bumpy stood there for a moment, let the rage drain out of him. Then he closed the razor, put it back in his pocket, went home. Margaret was still up, sitting in his living room with her Bible. She looked up when he walked in, blood on his vest, his knuckles scraped. She didn't ask questions, just stood up, walked to him, touched his face. You all right, baby? Bumpy nodded. Said, I'm fine, Mama. Did you handle it? He said I handled it. She kissed his forehead. Said, that's my boy. Then she went back to her Bible. Bumpy stood there watching her. This woman who'd saved his life by sending him away, who'd survived everything the world threw at her, who still made him biscuits and called him baby and loved him despite knowing what he'd become. He'd killed for less than what happened to her. Would kill again if anyone even looked at her wrong, because that was the rule in his Harlem. You could challenge Bumpy Johnson, could try to take his money or his territory or even his life. But his mother was off limits. Touch her, and there were consequences. Raymond Price learned that the hard way. The story spread through Harlem by morning. Not the details. Nobody knew exactly what happened in that basement, but they knew Raymond Price left New York on a midnight bus with a fresh scar on his face, knew he'd said something to Bumpy's mother, knew he'd laughed, and they knew he'd never be seen in Harlem again. The message was clear. Bumpy Johnson protected his own, protected his neighborhood, and most importantly, protected his mother. 3 days later, Margaret took the train back to Charleston. Bumpy drove her to Penn Station, carried her bags, bought her a first-class ticket, hugged her goodbye, told her he loved her, told her to come back any time. Margaret looked at her son, this man who'd become a legend, who ruled Harlem with an iron fist wrapped in expensive suits, who'd just scarred another human being for disrespecting her. And she saw her baby, the boy she'd sent away to save, the boy who'd survived and thrived and become someone powerful, someone dangerous, someone who still called her Mama. She said, I'm proud of you, Ellsworth, not for what you do, but for who you are. You're a good son. He kissed her hand. Said, I learned from the best. You taught me to survive, to protect family, to never let anyone make me feel small. I'm just doing what you taught me, Mama. She smiled, touched his cheek. Said, don't let this city change you too much. Don't let the violence become all you are. Remember, you're still my boy under all this. Bumpy promised her he would. Then she got on the train, waved from the window, and she was gone. Bumpy stood on that platform long after the train disappeared, thinking about Charleston, about the boy he used to be, about the man he'd become, about the moment some fool decided to laugh at his mother and signed his own fate without knowing it. Raymond Price lived another 42 years, moved to Philadelphia, changed his name, got a job in a factory, never came back to New York. Never told anyone the real story of his scar. Just said he'd been in a fight. People who knew him said he never laughed again. Not really, just a thin smile that never reached his eyes. Like something inside him had been permanently broken that September night in 1936. He died in 1978, alone, forgotten. Just another man who'd learned a lesson too late about respect, about knowing who you're threatening before you open your mouth, about understanding that some women have sons who remember, who protect, who won't let disrespect slide no matter how small or old or powerless that woman might seem. Margaret Moultrie. Johnson lived another 16 years, died in Charleston in 1952 at age 69. Natural causes, surrounded by family. Her funeral was attended by 200 people. Her son Ellsworth sent enough money to bury her like a queen, paid for the church service, paid for the flowers, paid for the meal after. He didn't attend, couldn't risk coming back to South Carolina. Too many warrants, too much heat. But he mourned her, carried her memory with him until his own death in 1968, and he never forgot the lesson she'd taught him without meaning to. That protecting the people you love isn't optional, that dignity matters, that respect isn't just given, it's demanded, and that sometimes when someone laughs at the wrong person, they sign a contract written in blood that can't be unsigned. That's the story of how a laugh became a scar, how disrespect became a lesson, how one man's arrogance met another man's loyalty and lost. Harlem remembered it for decades. The old-timers would tell it to young hustlers. Say you can rob, you can cheat, you can fight, but don't ever disrespect someone's mother in this neighborhood. Because you never know whose son she raised, you never know who'll come for you when the sun goes down, and you definitely don't know if that person is Bumpy Johnson. The man who loved his mama enough to mark another man for life. The Godfather of Harlem, who learned respect from a woman who survived the unsurvivable and taught her son to do the same.